Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. And today we're going to return to Napoleon Hill. I've done 2 episodes now on Napoleon Hill. Both of them were commencement addresses. So the reason I did those first is you can see the shift of Napoleon Hill from 1922 to 1957. And he had gone through so much up to 1922. Yes, there are articles that say he was a huckster, but you can see the story when you hear the end of the rainbow. But right now, as I'm speaking, it's tough times in the world. The world is protesting, and we're seeing injustice. It's a time that we're moving into a 4th density, as I talk about in the Law of One Material, which is a new age of love and understanding. Now, understanding is the key word here. We're moving and shifting into a 4th density world, so understand what that means. Look at what we've already been through. People are more aware of injustice. We were with the Me Too movement, but it seems to be a global thing. The movements are occurring at a faster pace. We're seeing history repeating itself. The Spanish flu in 1918 and the riots in the 60s. History always repeats itself, but what we're seeing is something a little bit different. We're seeing an awareness of injustice. This awareness is part of the catalyst that causes us to move away from service to self towards service to others. We recognize in others the injustices that we collectively can together change. Now, how do we change it? We hunger to see these injustices go away. But it feels hopeless sometimes. We look back and we see so many struggles. All the way back to the Civil War in this country, and before then, before the Bible. So when Neville Goddard says that we live in hell in this 3rd density earth experience that we're in right now, part of it is the ridiculousness of it. That we would be angry about the color of somebody else's skin when we are all the same, we are all one. So, going through this understanding and this change, imagine a world, a new earth, the same new earth that's discussed in the Bible. Imagine this world, that the new earth that's discussed by Dolores Cannon, that's discussed in the Law of One Material, that's discussed in so many different articles and books, where we don't have to worry about these things. There is no more struggle for money. There's no more hatred. There's no more racism or crime. Everything is taken care of, and we see and create our own realities. There is abundance for everybody. So we're on the cusp of that kind of a shift according to the Law of One Material. But we don't understand how to think. What we're seeing is our reflections. So I pondered and asked myself, and it's very interesting as I read these authors, I feel like I channel them. They want to talk to me. They tell me what material to read. A lot of times I don't know what I'm going to read until right when I sit down. And I have had discussions with Neville and Napoleon Hill and Anthony Norvell and Elizabeth Town and William Blake and so many. So it's interesting when I feel like they're actually talking to me. And I was tonight, it felt like Elizabeth Town was talking to me. If you check out my book that I read of hers, and I had got done working on her book, and then it felt like she and Napoleon were telling me I should read the Law of Retaliation. Napoleon Hill wrote articles for Success magazine and had the golden rules of Napoleon Hill magazine, as well as he discussed in the last lecture that we talked about, where he discusses his own experience in the Golden Rules magazine. So There are several articles that he wrote in this magazine, and some of them are absolutely fantastic teachings that are similar to lectures, and they're in the same amount of time and sequence. And I was taken to the fourth golden rule article or editorial that he had written, and it's called The Law of Retaliation, and it's just so good. And as I read it, I felt like I had been guided to read it. So how can we change this world? Well, I do believe we can shift into a social memory complex that is aware of each other's memories and even our past, where the Akashic record becomes activated. And when that happens, we will be aware of this law of retaliation, and there'll be an almost instantaneous shift in the way we think, and we can spur that on by becoming a social memory complex, aware of this memory. This is a memory that's deep within the human race. The law of retaliation is a natural part of how we respond. If somebody hits you, you want to hit them back, right? It's how nature works. It's how Earth works. You see it on the lowest level and the highest level. Watch even two cells. There's the law of retaliation. Now, the way that he describes the law of retaliation, it's very similar to the law of attraction. Perhaps it's the same thing. But there's a lesson within this as a discussion of the law of retaliation on how we deal with injustice and anger. And how do we deal with it when we see it and we want to change it? How do we change it? When we look through history, who has been most successful? We always see what is reflected to us. And you look at what Gandhi did and the incredible accomplishments of Martin Luther King and the shifts that happened in the world after these events. The non-violent event where the whole world comes together as an organism as one, and we can hold this and we can use this energy. So this is a lesson that he gives on the law of retaliation by Napoleon Hill. The Law of Retaliation. This lesson brings us to a discussion of one of the most important major principles of psychology, the law of retaliation, as follows. The human mind resembles Mother Earth, in that it will reproduce, in kind, that which is planted in it through the 5 physical senses. The preponderance of tendency upon the part of the mind is to retaliate in kind, reciprocating all acts of kindness and resenting all acts of injustice and unkindness. Whether acting through the principle of suggestion or autosuggestion, the mind directs muscular action that harmonizes with the sensory impressions it receives. Therefore, if you would have me retaliate in kind, you can do so by placing in my mind the sensory impressions or suggestions out of which you wish me to create the necessary appropriate muscular action. Injure or displease me, and like a flash, my mind will direct appropriate muscular action, retaliating in kind. In studying the law of retaliation, we are carried to an extent into that which we might call the field of unknown mental phenomena, the field of physics. The phenomenon discovered by this great field have not been reduced to a science, but again, let us bear in mind the fact that this shall not hinder us from making practical use of certain principles which we have discovered in this field, even though we cannot trace these principles back to first causes. One of these principles is that which we have stated above as our 4th general principle of psychology, namely, like attracts like. No scientist has ever satisfactorily explained this principle, but the fact still remains that it is known principle. Therefore, just as we make intelligent use of electricity without knowing what it is, let us also make intelligent use of the principles of retaliation. It is an encouraging sign to see that modern writers are giving their attention more and more to the study of the law of retaliation. Some of them call it one thing, and some call it another. But all of them seem to agree on the chief fundamental of the principle as follows: like attracts like. The latest writer to turn her attention to this subject is Mrs. Woodrow Wilson. Her article follows: there seems to be a mental law to the effect that whatever generally occupies the mind is almost certain to take form in the objective. Each of us proves that in his own experience dozens of times. For instance, you may come across a word you are not familiar with. To the best of your knowledge, you have never heard it nor seen it before, and yet after your discovery of it, you will encounter it again and again. This fact has recently come to me in an odd sort of way. I have been doing a great deal of reading and research on a subject which has interested me, and yet which would certainly never be classed as live news matter. I do not remember ever having seen it mentioned in any current publication, but since I have been familiarizing myself with it, I've clipped a large number of articles treating of one phase or another of it from various magazines and newspapers. You can easily follow the workings of this law, whatever it is, down to the smallest details. A friend came to see me a day or two ago and stood transfixed upon the threshold of my sitting room. "Flowers!" she exclaimed. "Roses!" There was such horror in her tones that I thought she was reproving me for buying anything but thrift stamps. She explained, however, that she was suffering from rose cold, which afflicts those who are subject to it at the same time each year, just as hay fever does. "It comes in June," she said, "when the roses are blooming, and even a whiff of their fragrance will set me sneezing for 20 minutes. It's rather a rare disease, isn't it?" I asked after I had whisked my flowers out of sight. "Not at all," she replied. "Very common. Every other person I meet has it." Now, I meet just as many people as she does during the day, perhaps more, and yet, with the exception of herself, I know no one who suffers from this malady. Again, why is it that, if we find our thoughts turning persistently to some particular person, we are very apt to hear from him or meet him within a short time? We may not have given him a thought for months or years, and yet behold, his shadow on the floor. I know there are various explanations for these phenomena, but none of them is entirely satisfactory. The effect, however, is as if we, unconsciously to ourselves, sent out wireless messages into the universe and received the responses. Like seeks like. May not this account for the fact that people with grievances are always well supplied with material for fresh ones? That the mournful people have plenty to mourn about? That the most dreadful of pests, the man or woman with a chip on their shoulders, invariably arouses a burning desire in the breast of the meek and innocent bystanders to knock it off? We all know people who are just naturally lucky. Everything seems to come their way, They don't have to climb trees and laboriously pick the fruit off the branches. They merely stretch out a hand and the plum falls into it. I heard a woman complaining of the inequalities of fate recently and comparing her lot with that of an acquaintance. "Just look at her," she said. "Here I have worked and worried and schemed and contrived for years. Anything that I get comes by the hardest kind of effort, and usually after 1,000 disappointments. But she, while not half so clever as I, nor so diligent a worker, is yet a sort of magnet, attracting to herself the good things which fly past me. There is no such thing as justice. But she affirmed the justice of the law, even while she denied it. I know the lucky woman as well as I knew the unlucky one. The difference between the two was that one was always expecting the worst and preparing for it, and the other looked forward to agreeable and pleasant things. She took them as a matter of course and made them welcome. It was always the top of the morning to her. There are days which are well known to all of us when everything goes wrong. There is certainly no malign power that is trying to thwart us and make us miserable, although it is often easier to believe so than to understand why one disturbing circumstance should follow another from early morn to dewy. One does not have to be a master of psychology to accept the truth of Mrs. Woodrow Wilson's article. It is a truth which we have all experienced, yet it is a truth to which most of us have attached little or no significance. It is in no spirit of irreverence that I place prayer, that mighty worker of miracles, in the great field of unknown phenomena. I am a firm believer in prayer. It has worked wonders for me. Yet I know nothing whatsoever as to the first cause as to which we appeal through prayer. I know this, however, that through consistent, persistent effort, prayer will break down all obstacles and force the seemingly unfathomable problems to give up their secrets. For 4 years, I prayed persistently for the truth that was wrapped up in what appeared to be an impenetrable secret in another's heart. The information I wanted was known only to one other person. The very nature of the information almost necessitated its being held inviolable forever. At about the end of the 4th year, I carried my prayers a step further than I had ever done before. I determined that I would shut my eyes and behold a picture of the exact information that I wanted. Strange as it may seem, I had hardly closed my eyes before the outlines of the picture began to trace themselves in my consciousness, and within 2 or 3 minutes, I had my answer. It seemed so strange to me that at first, I believed what I had seen was nothing but a hallucination. But I did not have to wait long before I knew better. The next day, I met the person in whose heart the secret was locked, and I was told by that person that for 4 years some strange force had been tugging at her heartstrings, trying to induce her to tell me a story which she said she now wished to relate. In that story was the information that I wanted and for which I had prayed for 4 years. Some would tell us that divine power produced this remarkable result, while others would be inclined to explain it through mental telepathy. My own opinion is that every thought vibration on the subject which was produced in my mind at the time of prayer, was registered in the subconscious mind of the other person, having traveled through the ethereal air currents just as vibrations sent by a wireless outfit traveled from one instrument to another, and that these thought vibrations finally caused the alchemic change to take place in her mind, which resulted in her decision to give me the information I wanted. Mind you, I said that I believe this is what took place as to the original cause that made possible the transmission of thought through the open air. I venture no suggestions. On another occasion, which is an extreme in the other direction, I accomplished a remarkable result through prayer in less than a minute and a half. An important business transaction was underway. I made an offer, and it had been turned down coldly. The person to whom the offer was made stepped out of his office for not longer than a minute and a half. While he was gone, I sent out a message through what we call prayer, in which I asked for a reversal of his ultimatum. He came back in and announced, without my saying a word, that he had changed his mind and would accept my offer. Before getting away from the subject of unknown phenomena, permit me to once more remind you that this course of scientific instruction has no connection whatsoever with any religious faith. And whenever we refer directly or indirectly to any subject connected with religion, we do so for purpose of comparison only. Millions of people have found happiness and contentment through the great unknown phenomenon which we call prayer. I have no desire to cause anyone to change his or her belief in prayer. To the contrary, I would do all possible to strengthen that belief. Neither have I any intention whatsoever of reducing prayer to a purely scientific phenomenon. Whether our prayers produce such wonderful results as we know they do, through the principle of autosuggestion, or through the influence of outside divine forces over which we have no control, is but little importance. We are apt to pray with more faith and persistence by directing our prayers to the divine source, and this within itself would warrant our refraining from adopting the scientific principle of autosuggestion as an explanation of the great phenomenon of prayer. Late one afternoon, I was sitting at my desk, waiting for Mrs. Hill to join me. The office had gone, and I was the only person in the room. I leaned over and rested my face on my hands, covering my eyes with the ends of my fingers. Mind you, I was not asleep, for I had not been in that position more than 30 seconds. Then a strange thing happened. It was almost time for Mrs. Hill to arrive. I heard her scream. I saw her knocked down by an automobile. I saw a policeman lift her up from the pavement and place her on the sidewalk. I saw the blood on her face. I opened my eyes and looked around. I could not have been dreaming because I was not asleep. Soon I heard Mrs. Hill's footsteps. She was excited and almost out of breath. Sure enough, she had been almost run down by an automobile at the very spot where I saw her. She did scream, and the policeman did pull her back on the sidewalk just as I had seen him do. And as near as we could estimate, all of this happened at the very moment when I saw it, sitting at my desk with my eyes closed, a block away from the actual scene. In the state of Illinois, near the city of Chicago, a few years ago, a farmer left his home one morning and started toward his fields to work. He had gone but a short distance when he experienced a strange feeling that impelled him to arbitrarily return to the house. He paid no attention to it at first, but it became stronger and more insistent. Finally, he could go no further. So he turned and started toward the house. The nearer he got, the faster he wanted to walk until he started to run. When he got inside the house, he found his daughter lying on the floor with her throat cut. Her assailant had gone but a few seconds before his arrival. What caused these strange phenomena? We do not know. Unless it was mental telepathy. These two cases are cited because both of them are authentic. I could cite more than a dozen similar cases, which would have a strong tendency to prove the existence of mental telepathy, through which thoughts actually pass from one mind to another, just as the vibration passes from one instrument to another through wireless telegraphy. Of course, these minds must be harmoniously attuned to each other, just as the wireless instruments must be properly attuned, or the thoughts will not register. These examples of what we might term unknown phenomena are mentioned in connection with this lesson for the reason that we want you to stop and consider what the possibilities are for making practical use of the law of retaliation, which operates directly through the 5 physical senses. We do not have to depend upon unknown phenomena or mental telepathy, which are but slightly understood at this time. We can reach and influence the human mind directly through the law of retaliation and the principle of suggestion. Suggestion is the medium through which we reach the mind of another, and the law of retaliation is the principle through which we plant in that mind the seed that we wish to see take root and grow. You know what retaliate means, in the sense that we are using it here. It means to return like for like, and not merely to avenge or to seek revenge, as is commonly meant by the use of this word. If I do you an injury, you retaliate at first opportunity. If I say unjust things about you, you will retaliate in kind, even in greater measure. On the other hand, if I do you a favor, you will reciprocate even in greater measure if possible. Thus, we are following the impulse of our nature through the law of retaliation. Through the proper use of this law, I can get you to do whatever I wish you to do. If I wish you to dislike me and to lend your influence towards damaging me, I can accomplish this result by inflicting upon you the sort of treatment that I want you to inflict upon me through retaliation. If I wish your respect, your friendship, and your cooperation, I can get these by extending to you my friendship and cooperation. On these statements, I know that we are together. You can compare these statements with your own experience, and you will see how beautifully they harmonize. How often have you heard the remark, "What a wonderful personality that person has"? How often have you met people whose personalities you coveted? The man who attracts you to him through his pleasing personality is merely making use of the law of harmonious attraction or the law of retaliation, both of which, when analyzed, mean that like attracts like. If you will study, understand, and make intelligent use of the law of retaliation, you will be an efficient and successful salesman. When you have mastered this simple law and learned how to use it, you will have learned all that can be learned about salesmanship. The first and probably the most important step to be taken in mastering this law is to cultivate complete self-control. You must learn to take all sorts of punishment and abuse without retaliating in kind. This self-control is part of the price you must pay for the mastery of the law of retaliation. When an angry person starts in to vilify and abuse you, justly or unjustly, just remember that if you retaliate in a like manner, you are being drawn down to that person's mental level. Therefore, that person is dominating you. On the other hand, if you refuse to become angry, if you retain your self-composure and remain calm and serene, you retain all your ordinary faculties through which to reason. You take the other fellow by surprise. You retaliate with a weapon with the use of which he is unfamiliar. Consequently, you easily dominate him. Like attracts like. There's no denying this. Literally speaking, every person with whom you come in contact is a mental looking glass in which you may see a perfect reflection of your own mental attitude. As an example of direct application of the law of retaliation, let us cite an experience that I recently had with my two small boys, Napoleon Jr. and James. We were on our way to the park to feed the birds and squirrels. Napoleon Jr. had bought a bag of peanuts, and James had bought a box of Cracker Jack. James took a notion to sample the peanuts. Without asking permission, he reached over and made a grab for the bag. He missed, and Napoleon Jr. retaliated with his left fist, which landed rather briskly on James' jaw. I said, "James, now see here, son. You didn't go about getting those peanuts in the right manner. Let me show you how to get them." It all happened so quickly that I hadn't the slightest idea when I spoke what I was going to suggest to James. But I sparred for time to analyze the occurrence and work out a better way, if possible, than that adopted by him. Then I thought of the experiments we had been making in connection with the law of retaliation. So I said to James, "Open your box of Cracker Jack and offer your little brother some and see what happens." After considerable coaxing, I persuaded him to do this. Then a remarkable thing happened. A happening out of which I learned my greatest lesson in salesmanship. Before Napoleon Jr. could touch the Cracker Jack, he insisted on pouring some of his peanuts into James' overcoat pocket. He retaliated in kind. Out of this simple experiment with two small boys, I learned more about the art of managing them than I could have learned in any other manner. Incidentally, my boys are beginning to learn how to manipulate this law of retaliation, which saves them many a physical combat. None of us have advanced far beyond Napoleon Jr. and James as far as the operation and influence of the law of retaliation is concerned. We are all just grown-up children and easily influenced through this principle. The habit of retaliating in kind is so universally practiced among us that we can properly call this habit the law of retaliation. If a person presents us with a gift, we never feel satisfied until we have retaliated with something as good as or better than that which we received. If a person speaks well of us, we increase our admiration for that person and we retaliate in return. Through the principle of retaliation, we can actually convert our enemies into loyal friends. If you have an enemy whom you wish to convert into a friend, you can prove the truth of this statement if you will forget the dangerous millstone hanging around your neck, which we call pride, stubbornness. Make a habit of speaking to this enemy with unusual cordiality. Go out of your way to favor him in every manner possible. He may seem immovable at first, but gradually he will give way to your influence and retaliate in kind. The hottest of coals of fire ever heaped upon the head of one who has wronged you are the coals of human kindness. Listen carefully to this story that Napoleon tells. One morning in August 1863, a young clergyman was called out of bed in a hotel at Lawrence, Kansas. The man who called him was one of Quantrell's guerrillas, and he wanted him to hurry downstairs and be shot. All over the border that morning, people were being murdered. A band of raiders had ridden in early to perpetrate the Lawrence massacre. The guerrilla who had called the clergyman was impatient. The latter, when fully awake, was horrified by what he saw going on through his window. As he came downstairs, the guerrilla demanded his watch and money and then wanted to know if he was an abolitionist. The clergyman was trembling, but he decided that if he was to die, then and there, it would not be with a lie on his lips. He said that he was, and followed up the admission with a remark that immediately turned the whole affair into another channel. He and the guerrilla sat down on the porch while people were being killed through the town and had a long talk. It lasted until the raiders were ready to leave. When the clergyman's guerrilla mounted to join his confederates, he was strictly on the defensive. He handed back the New Englander's valuables, apologized for disturbing him, and asked to be thought well of. That clergyman lived many years after the Lawrence massacre. What did he say to the guerrilla? What was there in his personality that led the latter to sit down and talk? What did they talk about? "Are you a Yankee abolitionist?" the guerrilla had asked. "Yes, I am," was the reply. "And you know very well that you ought to be ashamed of what you're doing." This drew the matter directly to a moral issue. It brought the guerrilla up roundly. The clergyman was only a stripling beside this seasoned border ruffian, but he threw a burden of moral proof onto the raider. And at any moment, the latter was trying to demonstrate that he might be a better fellow than circumstances would seem to indicate. After waking this New Englander to kill him on account of his politics, he spent 20 minutes on the witness stand trying to prove an alibi. He went into his personal history at length. He explained matters from the time he had been a tough little kid who wouldn't say his prayers and became quite sentimental in recalling how one thing had led to another, and that to something worse, until, well, here he was, and a might bad business to be in, partner. His last request in riding away was, "Now, partner, don't think too hard of me, will you?" From the Lawrence Massacre by a band of Missouri ruffians under Quantrell by J.S. Boughton and Richard Cordley. The New England clergyman made use of the law of retaliation, whether he knew it at the time or not. Imagine what would have happened had he come downstairs with a revolver in his hand and started to meet physical force with physical force. But he didn't do this. He mastered the guerrilla because he fought him with a force that was unknown to the brigand. Why is it that when once a man begins to make money, the whole world seems to beat a pathway to his door? Take any person that you know who enjoys financial success, and he will tell you that he is being constantly sought and that opportunities to make money are constantly being urged upon him. To him that hath shall be given, but to him that hath not shall be taken away, even that which he hath. Matthew 25:29. This quotation from the Bible used to seem ridiculous to me, yet how true it is when reduced to its concrete meaning. Yes, to him that hath shall be given. If he hath failure, lack of self-confidence, hatred, or lack of self-control, to him these qualities be given in still greater abundance. But if he hath success, self-confidence, self-control, patience, and persistence, to him shall these qualities be increased. Sometimes it may be necessary to meet force with force until we overpower our opponent or adversary. But while he is down is a splendid time to complete the retaliation by taking him by the hand and showing him a better way to settle disputes. Like attracts like. Germany sought to bathe her sword in human blood in a ruthless escapade of conquest. As a result, she has drawn the retaliation in kind of most of the civilized world. It is for you to decide what you want your fellow men to do. And it is for you to get them to do it through the law of retaliation. The divine economy is automatic and very simple. We receive only that which we give. How true it is that we receive only that which we give. It is not that which we wish for that comes back to us, but that which we give. I implore you to make use of this law, not alone for material gain, but better still, for the attainment of happiness and good will toward men. This, after all, is the only real success for which to strive. In this lesson, we have learned a great principle, probably the most important major principle of psychology. We have learned that our thoughts and actions towards others resemble an electric magnet which attracts to us the same sort of thought and the same sort of action that we ourselves create. We have learned that like attracts like, whether in thought or an expression of thought through bodily action. We have learned that the human mind responds in kind to whatever thought impression it receives. We have learned that the human mind resembles Mother Earth and that it will reproduce a crop of muscular action which corresponds in kind to the sensory impressions planted in it. We have learned that kindness begets kindness, and unkindness and injustice beget unkindness and injustice. We have learned that our actions toward others, whether of kindness or unkindness, justice or injustice, come back to us in even larger measure. We have learned that the human mind responds in kind to all sensory impressions it receives. Therefore, we know what we must do to influence any desired action upon the part of another. We have learned that pride and stubbornness must be brushed away before we can make use of the law of retaliation in a constructive way. We have not learned what the law of retaliation is, but we have learned how it works and what it will do. Therefore, it only remains for us to make intelligent use of this great principle. Pills for Pessimists, J.W. Wigglesworth, D.N. The devil worry spoils more digestions than whiskey. Fussing, fuming, fearing, and apprehending what? Usually nothing. They are all pure and simple evidence of ignorance or bodily distortion. Your body is influenced by your mind. Your mind is influenced by your body. An untrained mind worries. A sick body stimulates worry. A worrier's thoughts run riot. They roll in, one crowding the other out of order and arrangement. It's uncontrolled thinking. Worriers are like ships on the angry ocean, tossed here and there without any self-control. The worrier is either physically disorganized, or he proves his lack of confidence in God by worrying. Worry is cowardice if your body is all right. And besides, I am an old man and have worried much over things that have never happened. Fear freezes us up and puts our functions into cold storage. You stop when you fear. You chill your vitals and stand like a frozen being. What is fear? Just, I'm afraid? You must face the music of life. Your future is not today, but today makes your future. Fretting and fearing make a fitting future for themselves. If you want to be sick, want to devitalize and destroy your body, then fear and worry about things. It's a sure method of making a diseased future. Let this soak in. Hate is ungodly and ruins our bodies and minds. Beauty is skin deep, they say. Skin deep beauty becomes skin deep body full. Disposition ruining ugliness under the magic wand of hate. Hate is a low down, degrading, uncivilized, detestable thing. The woman in the gutter, in the lowest walks of life, is a queen beside the hater. You can't be good. You can't be reasonable. You can't think. You can't eat. Hate, and your body will show its mark. So will your future. You can't do good. You can't be sane and be jealous. You should consider your mind sacred. If you desecrate it with jealousy, you are ugly, unstable mentally, and an undesirable member of society. These four, worry, fear, hate, and jealousy, are the ravages of good health. Your body and mind must be right to be healthy. An unhealthy body makes an unhealthy mind. An unhealthy mind makes an unhealthy body. A real doctor must take these things into consideration. Good thoughts lead to health, wealth, and happiness. Bad thoughts lead to sickness, poverty, and hell. Look into the mirror and smile at yourself. So this is a wonderful lesson by Napoleon Hill. And again, I feel like I am experiencing some sort of Mandela effect. I went through a Napoleon Hill phase where I read everything that he wrote, every single piece of material, including all these articles. And I remember never seeing him say the law of attraction. And he talks about it here. This is the first time I've seen him. He may have talked about it in the laws of success, but I haven't seen it. And so we get a discussion of him, and this is Napoleon Hill talking about the law of attraction. You may think that he's talking about the law of attraction, but he does not talk about the law of attraction in Think and Grow Rich. So here we're talking about the actual law. He's saying that your thoughts and actions make you rich in Think and Grow Rich, but there's some great stuff in here. And the poem at the end was remarkable to read, and I could feel it. When I tell you that I was guided to read this, I was, and it feels like this was read for this moment. Talking about hate and how hate destroys you. Let me just tell you this. If you're racist or you hate somebody and you carry anger and hate and racism in your heart, then you are reflecting that, and you will only meet people that are angry and hateful. Like attracts like. So if you're out there and you are angry or hateful for any group because of their politics, because of the color of their skin, whatever it is, then you hate yourself. Remember, everybody is the same. We are all one. And when you can look somebody in the eye and see yourself, how could you put the knee to your own neck? So, how do we respond? It's so easy to become angry. So easy to be angry because these things never change. And the anger is the God force within those people rising up and doing what they're being guided to do. Neville Goddard always says that it's a stage that we're on, and in this stage where this is happening, thank goodness people are putting a flashlight on this thing that is so ridiculous, because I was talking to my son. I have an adopted son of Latino descent, but we really didn't talk about it until he went to school, and then he was talking to me about he had been insulted when he got home from school, and he's like, what does this mean? To come to the realization at a young age that something so ridiculous as the color of your skin is a big issue. It's like, oh, really? So many big ideas and cool things in the world, and we're going to really, that is going to be an important thing? Who cares? And then when you see the injustices in the world, and then you realize that you don't understand. I do agree with the idea that we should be listening more than lecturing. But I felt like I was guided to read this. And there is a message within this that if we choose to retaliate, it will just get worse. Like will attract like. But it's kind of a different way of explaining the law of attraction in terms of action in the ways that you get responses. So we have to learn to reduce our own pride and stubbornness in our own ideas in order to create unity and peace between peoples that don't agree with each other. And so that first step is just, we can't be stubborn about this. It's not my way or the highway. Those people in government that think they know, they don't know. Open yourself up and open your heart up to the world. But I believe that we can, through the powers that we've been talking about in all my other podcasts. If this is the first time you're listening, check out my previous episodes. But we can transform into a social memory complex that access the memories of this, and these things will change. And now we are accessing the memories of this. The deep primal subconscious mind is opening up to us, and we're becoming aware of the injustices and these forces of the negative, of the service to self, are very, very good. And they've never wanted to have too big of a catalyst because they wouldn't want the response. Oppression leads to freedom in many ways. So if you hate, you will have hate towards you. But now we have this big catalyst, and you can see the whole world. I just saw a huge demonstration in Amsterdam for George Floyd in the United States. The whole world coming out in a time of a plague, which is amazing. It's a sacrifice. People willing to say, I'm taking a chance to make this stand. And so we have a time now where we can change. Perhaps you've been stubborn about what your beliefs are about the world, and now is the time that we can look within. And if we broadcast out love, like attracts like, and love attracts love. And so, together, as we have learned these lessons about how to meditate and how our thought energy creates and how we can imagine for other people, it is time for us to activate as a social memory complex using this principle of like attracts like. And if we broadcast out together as a group, love, if we broadcast out that love, we will get it back in the world, and we can raise the vibration of this world. Oh, and you know I have a meditation soon, but in any case, I'm sending thoughts of peace to everybody that is listening to this, and love and happiness and joy. And take these lessons. We can make this change not with the sword, but we can make this change with our minds, and we can do it together. And that's what I'm asking you to do. The story in here is fantastic about the clergyman in a vicious situation where people are being killed around him because of their politics. And he could have gone and tried to attack him, but he didn't. So remember these lessons and his explanation of this, and we'll definitely come back to some of these golden rules to learn about more, but I thought it would be good to start on the law of retaliation. All episodes of the Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to the Reality Revolution.